This episode features Jessica Isaacs, who is a sports dietitian that specializes in performance nutrition for athletes. She has worked for the Los Angeles Clippers as well as with both the men's and women's basketball teams at UCLA. We talked about many different practical considerations as far as nutrition for athletes. We touched on her recommendations for youth and female athletes, as well as supplementation and different topics that are important for fueling for performance. We talked about some common misconceptions and myths when it comes to different supplements, diet fads, and what and when to eat, and much more.
This episode is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify.
So today I'm excited to introduce Jessica Isaacs, who is a sports dietitian, and we appreciate her time coming in person to talk all things nutrition and sports nutrition and just how to prepare yourself as an athlete outside of the weight room. So if you could just give a short intro kind of on who you are, and then I can't wait to hear from you.
Cool. What's up, guys? Thanks for having me. So I'm Jessica Isaacs, like I said, I'm a sports dietitian. I formerly am with the LA Clippers, spent a couple seasons with them. Before that, I was a sports dietitian for UCLA, men's and women's basketball. And before that, I was at Mamba Sports Academy working with all kinds of athletes there, youth athletes all the way up to pro athletes. I went to Purdue University, studied nutrition, got a degree in nutrition, and am a registered dietitian with a as a board certified specialist in sports dietetics.
Can you kind of make that distinction between nutritionist and dietitian? Because I know that's very important, and I don't think a lot of just regular, parents and athletes know what that distinction is and how important that is.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people know what it is. I didn't know what it was either. But there is an important distinction between nutritionist and dietitian or registered dietitian. One's a protected title and the other one's not. And what I mean by that is when you think of like a medical doctor or physician, you have the expectation of certain degree requirements, training requirements, testing requirements, and it's the same thing with a dietitian. Not that they went through the same schooling as a physician, although a lot of common classes, but that we have a required degree program. We have a required internship, and we have a required board exam and continuing education. There's no requirements to use the title nutritionist. So anybody can use the title nutritionist, someone with an interest in nutrition, or they could have a PhD in nutrition and call themselves a nutritionist. But it's important to understand that you don't have to have any set qualifications or expertise to use that. So if you're going to work with someone that calls themselves a nutritionist, you should understand and ask them more questions about their background.
Yeah, I think that's huge because I think a lot of coaches will label themselves as a nutritionist, and our backgrounds, we got to work together a little bit with the Clippers with my former client, and I noticed a huge difference between some of the other people that we had worked with or talked to in that field saying they were nutritionists versus kind of the detail that you went into of just certain things to set certain things up the right way. One of the things we're excited to talk about and to kind of dive into just right away here is kind of that like youth market in a sense. I think there's a lot of confusion around it. I think there's confusion from the top of like parents of understanding like what does my kid actually need, and then the kid being able to actually eat what they actually need to fuel themselves for sport or for life in general. And I think there's a lot of confusion there, and I think it's more of a lack of education than it is just because I think most parents that come to us are like, I want the best for my kid, but they don't understand like really what that means because there's so much information out there. And one of the things I wanted to kind of try to get out of this today was very kind of like a practical way, nothing super complicated, but like what are some things that the youth should be focusing on, both the athlete and the parent, that they could kind of take away from this like right away?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I like to do is talk about like a youth athlete and compare them to like a shiny new sports car. And so when you're a shiny new sports car, you do all the things, right? Like you take it off the lot, and probably not all drivers yet, right? We take it off the lot, we want it to go fast, it goes fast, we want it to stop, we want it to turn, it does all the things and it does it well. But if we're not taking care of that car over time, like maintaining it, changing the oil, changing the tires, rotating them, all the things, it starts to break down, and our bodies are the same way. So when we're a young athlete, we're probably performing okay, or maybe we're hitting some of our goals. But if we're not taking care of our bodies over time, then we're going to start to see it break down, right? And for parents, When I speak with youth athletes, I always like to include the parent, because the parent is such a key stakeholder in all of the decisions when it comes to what a kid's putting in their body. I mean, maybe not all the time, like maybe the kid has access to DoorDash on their own, but they're getting money from somewhere. Someone's doing the grocery shopping, someone's making the decision, someone's prepping the food. And if that's not the athlete themselves, and a lot of times it's not, it's the parent, then the parents need to understand nutrition just as much as their athlete. And they need to understand that a lot of nutrition that you see on the internet is not geared towards an athlete. It's geared towards weight loss. It's geared towards dieting. That's what most of the media that you see around nutrition is, because that's where the money is. And so we can't be listening to these messages that we see for weight loss and then trying to apply those to our youth athlete, because we're going to see some burnout, underfueling, and some issues.
So, like, I train a lot of female athletes, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there, like you mentioned. And I was training a couple this morning before our podcast, and I mentioned that you were coming on, and they were really excited and started to ask me questions that they just didn't know, because there's so much information out there. Like for female athletes in particular, what are some takeaways that they need to know in terms of performance and how to fuel the right way?
Yeah, so I see so many female athletes that just don't eat enough. Like most of them that don't eat enough. And that's true with females, I think, in general, right? And so again, we see a lot of these weight loss messages. We see a lot of these, we need to have a six pack or be super lean. And that's not necessarily true. And so when we're chasing that, we see a lot of girls that are intaking 1,200, 1,600 calories, or following these meal plans that they see online, or these cute little, like, super healthy meals. And I want people to understand there's a distinction between something that's healthful and something that's appropriate for an athlete, which needs a lot more calories. So if you're an athlete and you're consuming 1,600 calories as a female, it's not nearly enough. You have really high needs, and it's much higher needs than your peers, maybe than your family members. And so females need to understand that. I also see a lot of females that avoid things like fat, because fat has a lot of calories. We need those for hormones and for hormone production. I see a lot of female athletes in general, that avoid a lot of meat products and whatnot, but we're getting iron from there. So we might be stripping our diet of not only calories, but nutrients by kind of following some of these things that we see online.
So say, a high school basketball athlete, 140 pounds, she's playing every day, she's strength training 2 or 3 times a week. How many calories do you think they need to consume? I mean, what are some of the basics that, I would be able to give her some pointers on?
Yeah, so I would first have a disclaimer that it's so nuanced. You gave me a specific size and age, which definitely helps narrow it down. But then we have to talk about what's their goals. Are we trying to maintain weight, gain weight, lose weight, build muscle, build strength, right? If we're in a build phase, we are going to be in higher calories. If we are someone who's trying to maintain, then we're trying to find the level of calories at which we can perform well, but not necessarily go up or down body fat or lean body mass. But generally, that's going to be at least 2,400 calories probably, maybe even more like 3,000 plus, which sounds like a big scary number. And as a basketball athlete, 55 to 65% of all your calories should be carbohydrates, which is even a scarier number, I think, for a lot of athletes, because carbs have such a bad distinction. But it's important to understand carbs are what give us energy. Carbs are your energy nutrients. So if the more active you are, the more activity you're doing, whether that's sport or day-to-day life. If you're out skateboarding with friends or playing pickup outside of your sport, the more carbs and calories you need.
Why do you think that is? Because I've always understood that's probably the first thing that every athlete comes to me, from the highest level athlete that I worked with to the youngest, is that I got to be on this low carb diet.
Yeah.
Where did that? Your opinion on where did that term come from? Why is it so frowned upon? I've always been curious about that.
It's the environment. So I think it's a mixture of media, things people see on social media. I think it's parents, what parents have said. I mean, growing up, my mom was always on a diet. I don't know about your moms, but my mom was always on a diet. My mom was always watching what she ate, and she was always talking about that. So that influenced me from a young age. I didn't know anything about nutrition, but I knew that there were some things that were bad and there were some things that were okay. And so I see that at peers, whatever peers think. If peers are trying to lose weight or being weight conscious, and coaches, honestly, coaches are there's a lot of people that work around athletes, strength trainers, coaches, athletic trainers that have that don't have it right either, and they influence as well. And so if they're telling an athlete to watch their weight, they're automatically going to probably say, like, watch your carbohydrate intake. And so that makes in my head me think, oh, carbs must be bad then, so less carbs would be better, right? Like that's the logic, but it's not black and white like that.
What is some bad advice? I mean, you mentioned there's bad advice that's given out. Give us some examples of just some of the worst takes and the worst things that you've heard to totally avoid.
Oh gosh. Okay. So one thing is that your urine should be clear as an athlete.
Interesting.
And urine should be clear. Drink a gallon a day of water, your urine should be clear. Athletes sweat, and athletes lose electrolytes in their sweat, the main one being salt or sodium. And so if we're just having clear urine, it means that we're drinking in more water than we're actually absorbing. And so it should be a light yellow, like a lemonade color, and we might be drinking too much water too fast, or we might not be including enough sodium or electrolytes in our water. The other one would be that, like, keto is a good diet for an athlete. It's not. The research supports it. There are plenty of things that keto, if we want to argue, right? There's plenty of things that keto may or may not do, but for an athlete, research has consistently shown a high carbohydrate diet is the more optimal diet especially for like a strength and power team-based sport athlete. Intermittent fasting, that's another one that's not a great idea for an athlete. Athletes, especially student athletes, have short windows of the day to get all this nutrition in. Between, like, you have a long school day, then maybe you have practice, games, whatever, and you're not eating through all that, or if you're not eating much, you're not going to get enough calories in your day, and you're going to be underfueling.
Yeah, the hydration one is, I think, a big one. I think there's a lot of companies out there now, like the Drip Drops, the LMNTs, all those kind of companies that are coming out now. What would you say is there a proper time? Well, I know there is, but your take on, like, the proper time for those type of things, the proper time for water and that kind of stuff? Because I see both sides. I see athletes that only drink Gatorade and they think that's hydrating. Then I see athletes that only drink water and they think that's it. So, like, where's the balance there of, like, the timing of it? Because I know that's really important, and you know, that type of thing. So I just had a youth athlete that she only drinks, like, lemonade and juice, and her argument always is, well, there's water in it, so I'm hydrating. And you try to explain to them, and they don't really fully understand it. So the timing of, like, water versus some of these, you know, drinks that are out there now versus Gatorade and that kind of stuff, kind of break down a little bit of that, the importance of it.
Well, to her point, there is water in it, and there are carbohydrates in it, which actually do help with hydration. So it is maybe not the most hydrating, but it is hydrating.
Yes.
But I would say around exercise. So before, during, after. Everybody's sweat rate's different. Everybody sweats at a different degree. Younger athletes actually don't really sweat. That's not really the way that they remove heat from their bodies. But you'll know probably if you're a really heavy sweater or if you're a really salty sweater. So if you're someone that gets, like, your jersey or your hat gets really white, like you get those white stains on it, you get the crystals on your skin, you get sweat that drips down into your eyes and stings, and it tastes real salty, then you're a saltier sweater, most likely. There's ways you can test this in a lab, but most people aren't going to do that, right? So I would be paying attention to, again, like urine color. If it's darker, then we need more fluids. If it's too light, then we need more electrolytes. And concentrate those either Gatorades or, you know, sports drinks, carbohydrate drinks. Concentrate it for the most part around activity, and then probably plain water or something like that is the better choice outside of activity.
Do you have any guidelines on how much per day water should an athlete be, you know, drinking?
Yeah, so a baseline for an average human is half your body weight in ounces of fluid. So taking that 140-pound person, that's 70 ounces of fluid. That's your baseline, though. So sweat is fluid. When you are using the bathroom, when you're breathing, you're losing fluid. So we need to take that into consideration as well. I like to see about 24 ounces in the couple of hours leading up to activity, and then about, like, 4 ounces. So that's like two, 3 big, like, not chugs, but like gulps of water every 15 to 20 minutes during activity. And then we should be continuing to hydrate after we've exercised and putting those fluids back in. Math equation you can use is to kind of weigh yourself before and after, if that's not triggering. And then looking at weight loss. And for every 1 pound you lose, you would consume 16 to 20 ounces of fluid. So about a pound for a pound.
So I know you mentioned Gatorade. What are some good, other than water, drinks that athletes should be consuming? Because I have some parents that are, you know, hesitant about the sugar that's in Gatorade. So is that a good option, and or are there other better options?
So Gatorade and like Powerades, those are actually good options, but they may not be hydrating enough. So we get carbohydrates in them. Carbs are actually helpful for hydration. We store water with carbs as well. So carbs are a part of hydration, and Gatorades and whatnot were made to be drank during activity, so to provide an additional source of energy during activity through their carbohydrates. But their sodium level may not be enough for like a saltier sweater. Things like Body Armor and Prime, which are super popular right now, are coconut water-based beverages. They are high in potassium, but don't really have a lot of sodium. So they're actually not hydrating enough on their own. Surprisingly, things like milk or chocolate milk are super hydrating. They have a lot of electrolytes, carbohydrates, and they have protein in it as well, but fluid. You can always add in like an electrolyte. You mentioned like drip drop element, that sort of thing, into a drink. But those are the main ones that I would think of. You can make your own sports drink as well with taking like some like fruit juice and water and salt and creating your own if you're worried about sugars. But an important thing to know is that sugar is carbohydrate, and we need carbohydrate or sugar during exercise.
Why is chocolate milk so good?
Yeah.
Because I hear that a lot, but I've never understood why.
There's a lot of reasons. When we're done with exercise for recovery, we're looking for a few things. We're looking to refuel our carbohydrate stores with carbs. So we get some carbohydrates in the chocolate milk. There's extra sugar. We need protein to repair our muscles, so we get a good ratio of carbs to protein in it. And then it has fluid and electrolytes. So we also want to rehydrate. Refuel, repair, rehydrate after exercise. And it does all of those. Plus, it's like, usually kids like it. It's cheap, it's convenient, it's accessible. There's lots of ways to get it done, but it just ends up being like a really good option for all those things after recovery.
Do you have a good recommendation on brand, or can you make your own? Or
Yeah, you can make your own, at home. I like Fairlife milk personally. It's lactose free, so people that have trouble digesting milk and lactose shouldn't have as much issues with it. And then it also is higher in protein than your typical milk, so it's actually a really great option.
He's laughing because I drink one a day.
Yeah.
Fairlife.
Yeah.
This guy drinks like a whole liter of Fairlife
Let's
every
go.
day.
See?
Yeah,
He's
totally.
trying to put you on. He's trying to put you on.
A little bit off topic, but due to, in regards to hydration, creatine, for some reason there's kind of maybe it's a misnomer, maybe it's not, that creatine can cause dehydration. Can you touch on creatine and hydration?
Yeah, well, first I will say creatine, like almost every human can benefit from it, of all ages. It's one of the most well-researched, evidence-based performance products out there. We make creatine in our bodies. We also get creatine from animal-based proteins. Creatine is important for the phosphocreatine pathway, which is basically like our explosive movements. Olympic lifts, sprints, jumps, those are all fueled by the phosphocreatine pathway. So by increasing the amount of creatine we have, the more explosiveness potentially we could have, more speed. We can also build muscle with it. We can maintain muscle with it. So whether you're trying to build or even maintain your lean mass while losing body fat, it's helpful. It also has some really great cognitive benefits too. So any kind of contact sport where there's a traumatic brain injury, concussion potentially, it's really helpful for preventing the extent of that injury or also recovery from it. But some reasons why people don't like creatine, there's a lot of misconceptions. It's a steroid. It's not. Different chemical structure, not the same thing at all. It could be, they might say it's dehydrating because as we increase like our protein intake, there's more that our kidneys have to process, and so we should be drinking more fluids if we're increasing protein or creatine. But other than that, like sometimes people will say like it bloats them. You don't have to take that mega dose to start off with. You don't have to load it. You can just take 5 grams consistently, and you shouldn't really see that big like swell. But really, creatine is a great option for a lot of athletes and people.
Yeah, parents for whatever reason are very hesitant. They'll even say that their pediatricians tell them not to take it because it's harmful for them. I don't know why that's out there because of the research that's been done on it. Yeah. So well documented, but I do hear that a lot. Like I've heard that dozens of times that their kids' pediatricians have told them not to take it, that it is harmful and to their kidney and other things. So can you touch on why you think that is, or have you heard that?
I would ask to see the research, and I would ask to ensure that it's in like human populations and not like rats and such, because again, there's mounds of research that say it's safe. But the one thing to understand, this is not to knock on physicians. I'm a daughter of physicians, but physicians only get like one class on nutrition as they go through medical school. Some schools require more, but generally just one class, 3 credit hours is required. So physicians, believe it or not, are not experts on nutrition. And though you should consult them before taking different things, understand with anybody you're working with, understand their expertise level. Is this a physician that works with, a pediatrician that works with athletes specifically? Or is this a general pediatrician that maybe works with more general populations and isn't as familiar with current research?
Yeah, I mean, I just had a high school kid that just started taking creatine because of the same thing. He's like, my whole life they told me it's bad for me, it's bad for me, it's bad for me. And now he took it. You know, I think he has a little placebo effect because he feels amazing now, but it's the same. It's the same thing, and it's an interesting, weird thing. But I think the whole supplement realm is a weird thing. Yeah. People get freaked out about taking protein shakes or whatever it might be. What are some of like these simple supplements that I think before we jumped on air was, you know, iron for females, and there's some other ones out there. But what are some that, and obviously consult someone before you start pounding a bunch of supplements every day, but what are some of like the basic ones that are heavily researched and that benefit athletes, you know, without a doubt, and they could be taking them tomorrow?
Yeah, well, I'll come up with my disclaimer first here.
Yes.
I'm a big like food first always.
Yes.
So like as much as we can get things from our diet, we should. There are reasons why we can't always meet all of our needs, or it's just not convenient, or we can't consistently do it. And there's different reasons. When we're looking at supplements, a big thing to keep in mind, especially because most of our athletes are tested or will be at some point, right, is we want to look to make sure that it's third-party tested. And specifically on the bottle, we're looking for a logo that says NSF Certified for Sport or Informed Sport. And that means that it's been third-party tested for label accuracy, for certain safety, that's not cross-contaminated with banned substance. That's a really, really common thing, is that a lot of products do get contaminated with banned substances. So we want to be careful of that. That being said, creatine's the one that I can stand behind. A good protein powder, if we have difficulty getting in protein consistently for people, or for maybe a vegetarian or a vegan athlete, and so we're already eliminating a lot of high protein sources, then that might be a reason to have a good protein powder around. An omega-3 of like an EPA, DHA, fish oil kind of product is usually good for most people aren't getting enough, and it's important for brain health, it's important for inflammation. And then for women, now we mentioned iron. A lot of female athletes are iron deficient. If you feel like a lot of fatigue when you get up in the morning and you're just tired through the day for no reason, this could be a sign of iron deficiency. But before we take iron, we want to get our iron levels tested. I would say female athletes should get their iron tested annually. If you have a history of low iron, then I would get it tested more often than annually before we supplement. But that would be another one that we could potentially supplement with. What else? Magnesium. A lot of people don't get enough magnesium in. With anything, I always want to do like a detailed review of what we are getting already and see if there's other things we can benefit from. A multivitamin might be common. I would say go to a multivitamin before like a greens powder, though.
Yeah, and what I always tell my athletes is that it's called a supplement because it's a supplement.
Yeah.
Like if you can't get it from your food, which a lot of times in like the youth and high school, it's hard to have this perfect diet.
Yeah.
And that's why I tell them it's a supplement for a reason, because now we can supplement what you're missing, and you know, you might feel better throughout the day, you might be less fatigued, your performance might go up, those type of things. But let's look at what you're eating first to understand what to even supplement with, not go, okay, Jessica just said these 7, I'm going to go buy them, I'm going to take 2 a day of everything. It's like, no, let's actually understand. The interesting thing to me though is getting your levels tested. For some reason, I feel like that's not always easy.
No.
Because I've had athletes that have gone into their general doctors and have said, hey, my trainer asked if I could get a blood panel, and they're like, either they say no or an insurance company or something like that says no. Where do they go to do that?
That's where someone like me is helpful, because a lot of times, even if I go get my blood tested, a doctor's going to do some standard things. They're going to check your like CBC, CMP. They're going to check certain things, but they're not necessarily going to test your iron levels. They're not necessarily going to test your omega-3 levels or your cortisol levels or other things that you might have an interest in being tested. Your vitamin D levels. Vitamin D is another one I didn't mention, but a lot of people are deficient in. They're not necessarily going to test those things, so you need to ask specifically for them. And if you're kind of going on your own, own, it might be hard to like convince them of that, because it's even been hard for me to convince my physician. You can order labs on your own sometimes. It's always better if you can try to get it ran through insurance as much as possible to cut down costs. But there are ways that you can go and have labs drawn on your own through like a Quest or something like that. And there's some labs you can even do at home nowadays too. Like Thorne is a company that does some at-home testing. But it's always helpful if you can partner with somebody that can actually like say like, hey, take these to your doctor and then have them call me if they can't get these labs for some reason.
What are some other nutritional considerations for the youth athlete? And obviously this is for the parent, because the parents are controlling a lot of the variables, but I think there's just a lot of outdated information that that parents rely on that maybe not be true at all. It maybe once have been true and now research has changed. What are just some general nutritional considerations for a youth athlete? Should they be supplementing? Should they not? Can you touch on that just generally?
One of the first things that's jumping out to me, because I've had a lot of people ask me about this vitamin called True Height, which is like for like growth, is calcium and vitamin D and just bone building nutrients. We are at our most active bone building stage when we're young and up to our early 20s. And so if we're not taking strong efforts now to get in those nutrients that help to build our bones, we can have weakened bones grow as we move forward, or we could just not necessarily get as tall as we hope to get. So like milk, for some reason, like for lots of reasons, is demonized. People think it's inflammatory. It's not. Research proves that it's not. Some people have problems digesting it. We talked about like we can look for lactose-free options, but making sure that we're getting in milk products or dairy products, or supplementing, finding other things that are rich in calcium and vitamin D. That's important. I would say making sure that we're getting food in first. Like we should be eating pretty regularly. If you're going more than 4 hours of your day without some sort of meal or snack as an athlete, you're probably not getting in enough. So just the consistency. And then also, packaged goods. There's like different thoughts around packaged snacks and whatnot. I would say like if the bulk of your diet shouldn't come from things out of a package, but there are reasons why something in a package, or even something like that doesn't sound healthful, like goldfish crackers or fruit snacks. That doesn't sound healthy, but that's a really fast and easy, convenient fueling item for an athlete to have in their bag to eat before practice or snack on through the day, right before like they're active. So those ones is just like understanding that we're not always looking for the most nutrient-rich option. Sometimes we need to look for the calorie-rich option too. So if our kid's just eating salad all day, if we're someone who's like really health conscious and we're thinking that our kid should just be eating vegetables and lean proteins, we might actually not be getting enough calories overall, and that's important for making sure we're growing and building in the right direction.
I think that's a huge point, because I think a lot of what you touched on earlier was like under eating and losing weight based on these diets that they see, because they say you can't eat goldfish, you can't eat Cheez-Its, you can't eat fruit snacks. And then you see kids that are fatigued, you see kids that are tired all the time, and they just won't eat any of that stuff, then they end up not really eating. And it's an interesting area, and I'm glad you touched on it, because I've had that conversation. I think a lot of times what you also said earlier was getting athletes to eat more. All of a sudden they feel way better, they start putting way more muscle on, the six-pack starts to come out, and it's just because they just started to eat a little bit more throughout their day. Touch on a little bit of I'm trying to think a little bit of like the practical side of a high school kid, or even like a college kid now, but if they are going to, shop at a store for themselves, is like, what are some of the things from like a snack perspective that may be a little more on the healthier side, but also on the convenient side? Because I know you've worked with UCLA, the Clippers. To me, these guys are just big kids with a little bit more money than
right.
They're still kids. Like they like the goldfish, they like that kind of stuff. What are some of the things that you would have in your bag that guys would have that you felt comfortable giving to them?
Yeah. So if it's like pre-exercise, we want something that's carb rich. It could be fresh fruit, dried fruit. We could do something like the goldfish, fruit snacks, that sort of thing. If it's something like, we want to always have protein snacks with us too. A lot of times if we're, especially if we're going periods through the day without eating protein, we might not be getting enough. That's important for building muscle, maintaining muscle. So things like jerky, trail mix, nuts, seeds, those sorts of things that we can snack on. Those are easy to have on hand. Cut up fruits and veggies veggies or like another thing to snack on, making sure that we're getting fiber in. Fiber is helpful for digestion and other things. So things like that. I've got some guides and I'll share them and maybe we can link them somewhere of just like grocery shopping lists. A lot of athletes don't understand like what a carb is, what a protein is, what a fat is. And so this is just something that like they can take around the store. And what I say is like when you're thinking about any meal or thinking about a meal, we'll start there. There's a few things I like to see on every plate is a carbohydrate source. So that's like rice, pasta, bread, potatoes, corn. A protein source. So that's things with like legs, fins, feathers, that's what eyeballs, but also there's plant-based proteins as well. And then something with color. So a fruit or a veggie, like to see a lot of veggies, but it doesn't always make sense to have veggies and some people are veggie avoidant. But those things should be on every plate. And so when we're shopping in a grocery store, we want to think of what do I have for a good carb source? Things that are going to be whole grain are going to have more protein and nutrient rich. So these are like your meals outside of training. But we do actually want some fast, like white breads and white starchy carbs closer to training. It's easier to digest. We want to make sure we have proteins on hand, whether that is something that's quick and available. So like rotisserie chicken's an easy way to like, if you're not a good cook, to like get a rotisserie chicken. You can even get it like pre-cut up and have that. Tuna packets, those are really easy things that you can have for protein sources, and then making sure you get fruits and veggies.
What about youth athletes in particular, and high school that are a little bit overweight? How do you approach that as a parent and as the athlete themselves, who still need a fuel for performance, but they are a little bit overweight? What are your recommendations?
So first of all, I would say any kind of targeting weight loss should really happen outside of the competitive season. During the competitive season, we want to be fueling in a way that we perform at our best. And in order to lose weight, we have to be in a deficit. So we're not going to be fueling at our best in a deficit. So this is like off-season, pre-season work. This is when that should be done. But there's some changes we can make to our plate. So I just talked about the things that I like to see on a plate. We can look at plate portions. And so we can take, like if you look at an 8-inch, 9-inch circular dinner plate, if you divide that in half of that would be like vegetables, something that's fiber rich, nutrient rich, and it's not going to be really high in calories. We want to watch some of the heavier dressings and things that can have calories creep up. If we're adding dried fruit to that, like raisins or craisins or something like that, that can add a lot of calories quickly. So we want to be careful with that. But half of the plate, veggies, and then lean protein. So about at least a hand size, whatever their hand is, size of a lean protein. That's like chicken, fish, lean beef, that sort of thing. And then carbs being the other just quarter of the plate. So carbs are still important. We want to make sure we're not removing them completely. What happens if we remove them completely? We see our energy suffer. We see even just some of our cognition and like focus can suffer from being too low carbohydrate. And what happens is once we reintroduce them is we can gain weight pretty quickly. We might see some benefits fast in dropping the weight. That's for different reasons. But we'll also see weight come back on quicker. So we want to make sure we continue to have carbs. We just want to make sure that we watch the quantities and we're focusing on fiber-rich foods and protein-rich foods primarily. And again, off-season should be where we do a lot of this work.
I like that. That's interesting. I've never heard someone take the in-season, off-season approach to it, because I think the athlete gets so stuck on losing weight.
The problem is if we're hounding, it's a really delicate subject, right? Because if we're hounding weight loss so much, we can do things like I've seen a lot of my athletes do, where they just cut out meals completely, or they're focusing on dropping water weight, which isn't fat mass. And we may look better and may be lighter on the scale, but that's not maintainable. We put back on water weight. Losing fat mass should be slow and controlled. If we're doing it aggressively, we could do it maybe more aggressively in the off season, but if we do it too aggressive, it's not maintainable. And if it's not maintainable, then it's only temporary. And so I don't know about you, but like I don't want to go through this long phase of being miserable for it only to be temporary. Like I want to figure out what kind of modifications do I make? And maybe it's a slower road, but modifications that I make that I can maintain and be consistent with and take forward and then not have to be back in this position again.
That's the hardest part. And the hardest part, I think, in our profession on the private side or as a dietitian or nutritionist, when someone comes into you and says, I want to lose 20 pounds in a month. Mm-hmm. And you're like, well, we could set that up, but what's more beneficial for you? And usually what I have people do is, a lot of my clients, I tell them is that I usually go two-ish pounds a month And then I say, if you do that for a year, that's 24. If you do that for another year, that's 48. Now you maintain that because now you have these habits and these routines that now all of a sudden you're never back at 250 pounds or whatever number they were at. And I just had this with the client, and he's lost 8 pounds now, but he's like, I feel so much better. I have my energy, and I'm not spiking back up. And that's probably one of the biggest things that you probably see, that I see a lot, is like that yo-yo dieting, where that you see a person lose 20 pounds, you're like, dang, you look really good, and then you see them again, they're up 40 pounds. And then they get into this mental trap, and now they don't have a relationship with food, and it gets all ugly. But it's hard in the private sector to tell someone, I only want you to lose 2 pounds every month, and when they came to you to lose 20 pounds. Right. Which you might lose them, but I think as professionals, you have to understand that. It's better for you in the long run, you'll feel better. And I think that's somewhat of an approach you could probably take with the youth, I would assume, because you're young. It's like, look, you're 10.
Right.
Let's look at when you're 14 going into high school, that you're, a fit athlete that's ready to go. Let's not try to, get you in shape, currently right this second.
Yeah, you're still growing and developing too. And if you're trying to crash diet a young person, you risk injuring them, you risk stunting their growth, you risk screwing up their relationship with food, like you said, and body image for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, because they're so impressionable at that age. Mm-hmm. But what I was getting into was protein, and where that number is. What I have found to help me and my clients is just by increasing their protein, because most of the time when I have a client come in, what I do typically is give me 3 days of what you eat, write it out, hydrate, all that stuff. And I basically will just instantly go to protein. And 90% of my clients are usually calorie deficient and significantly protein deficient as an athlete. And so basically what I tell them is try to get 1 to 2 grams of protein per body weight. And then all of a sudden they feel instantly better. It's more calories in their diet. They're eating more protein. But what's your recommendation on protein, and where does that look at for you?
So it depends on what your goal is. My measurements in kilograms, but it's usually
it's kilograms.
1.6 for a strength and power, 1.6 at a minimum grams per kilogram, up to 2.2, which could be closer to 1 gram per pound.
Yes.
So I would say for someone that 2.2 grams per kilogram would be a 1 pound or 1 gram per pound. So if you're doing that would be great for someone trying to grow, or someone to maintaining lean body mass while trying to lose body fat. That 1 gram per 1 pound would be great.
Yeah. I've just found, you corrected me because I said that completely wrong, but that's what I was
2 grams would be a lot. That'd be a lot, but I mean,
that's what I go by. But
my
point was, even doing the 1 gram for some athletes, they're blown away with how much more they have to eat. And then it's usually, for me, a lot of my athletes like protein, like the chickens, the steak, that kind of stuff, to where they'll eat more of it, and now I could get their calories up. And I feel like it's a healthier option than just go eat some more chips and stuff, just because that's what they go to. They don't understand. But if I say, okay, at least hit your protein number, now all of a sudden your calories go up, and now and that's usually how I handle things, which
we can store carbohydrates in our body, and we can store fat in our body. We don't store protein. So we're having protein turnover every single day. So if we're not getting in enough protein every single day, we're not going to be keeping up with what our body needs, and we're going to see either muscle loss, we might see more soreness, we might see our strength gains aren't happening, or we just don't feel as strong anymore, or as we did previously. So we want to make protein something that we're doing consistently every day. The cool thing about protein too, if we are someone who's weight conscious, is we burn off 20-25% of the calories of a protein food just through the digestive process. So if you're going to go ham in any area, we're on your plate, and you want seconds, or you're hungry, and when you're trying to cut weight, go up in protein.
Can you talk about timing of meals for athletes? Because you mentioned school and how hard that can be. And most athletes that I train don't prioritize breakfast at all, which is a major problem. Yeah. But can you talk about that a little bit in timing and time of day, and kind of how to structure a day for a high school or a college athlete?
Yeah, there's no one way to do it. There's plenty of ways to get it done, but what I see is the best way for athletes is to not go more than 4 hours of your day without eating something, and 2 to 3 hours if you're someone who's trying to build muscle. But that means that we have to keep things honest, and that we also need to get up and have breakfast or plan ahead. Maybe it's over overnight oats. Maybe it's something that's pre-made. Maybe it's something that's just grab and go. Don't love to see like a protein bar and a banana every single day for breakfast, but if that's the best you can do, if you can do a smoothie, if that's what you can do that. But if we have these really high calorie needs and we're missing windows of the day to get it in, we're going to find that we are super hungry at night. And in these periods at night or whenever, when we're finally able to get food, we're going to go for whatever's convenient and sounds the best. And that's going to probably be like a bag of chips. I have a 16-year-old, spicy hot Cheetos or Takis, right? And then we fill up on that, which cool, have some of that in your day, but you fill up on that and then you don't eat the actual meal, and so you're missing all these nutrients. So it's not that breakfast is the most important thing in the world, it's just it sets us up for those good habits throughout the day, and it helps to make sure that we're getting in nutrients and calories in the windows when we have the opportunities to. If we miss that and then we forget to bring a snack, and then maybe our lunch is insufficient because we're getting it from school and they won't give us seconds, or the food there sucks that day or whatever, like you see all these times where, all right, cool, we're just further and further and further in the hole. And if we think of ourselves, again, as that car metaphor, we're running out of gas. And then we're getting to the end of our day when we're expecting to be active and we have no gas. Like, of course you're going to feel like crap. Of course you're going to die. Of course that training session is going to suck.
What about recommendations for athletes that are on medications that affect their appetite?
Yeah.
Because I've dealt with that quite a bit. What are some recommendations as far as that goes?
That's a tough one, because like if you're on someone like an ADHD medication or something like that suppresses your appetite, that suppresses that kind of like chemical signal, right? But you can still override that signal. You just have to know, like, hey, even though I'm not feeling hungry, I need to make myself eat something. And liquid calories are something that, like, if your stomach is a muscle, and just like any muscle, we can train it, right? And so we can train it to get bigger, we can train it to be able to take in more food. So if you're having difficulty getting in something, first I would say, like, just try to get something in. And if that's something like a smoothie, you can put a lot of nutrients into a smoothie still. It's gonna take up a lot less space, and then we can build off of that. And then your body will adjust. Your appetite will come back, or at least be able to adapt to that higher calories that you're giving it. You just have to be consistent on top of it, and that just means consciously thinking about it and having a plan.
And we've talked a lot about this on just like the strength side of things, but the importance of consistency and the importance of not just coming in for 6 weeks and then leaving for 8 weeks and then coming back for 6 weeks. But what had me thinking about this was consistency in like diet, or not, I don't like to call it a diet really, but just your nutrition and what you're getting into your body. What like, are there effects and research out there on, like, if you do really good for a couple of days and then have a couple bad days, or good, like, where are the benefits bigger for being really consistent with it? Or you kind of get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm getting, because we've talked about that a ton with strength training, like the consistency. I'd rather you come in once or twice a week for a year versus come in for 6 weeks once a year. And so the consistency of having good routines and stuff, is that, is that as big in your nutrition lifestyle and stuff?
Yeah, it's important, because we talked about making those like steady, sustainable changes, and you can only do that with consistency and consistency of habits. If you think about anything, like you think about learning to tie your shoe, you had to do that probably every day, and then as you did it every day, you didn't really have to think about it anymore, and now you're a rock star at tying your shoes. Every habit's like that. We need to consistently do it so that we no longer have to think about it. Because when we make any change, it's difficult at first. When we learn any new skill, it's difficult at first. And if we're not continuing to do it and practice it, then we have to spend more mental energy on it, and it becomes something that's like a task and something that's hard for us to do. So if we're consistent with habits, it becomes easier, not only mentally, but we also see the effects of that are cumulative. Just like I talked about, like protein turnover is every single day. Well, if you are really good with your protein intake for a couple weeks, and then you don't have protein intake, you're going to lose muscle mass in those couple of weeks that you didn't eat protein. If you're someone who's put on body fat, you didn't get there because you just did it. You just ate something over your calories one time. You consistently ate calories. And so same thing. If you want to go the other direction, we have to consistently do things.
I've had some athletes that have dealt with significant cramping during competition. I was curious, anybody that you've worked with the Clippers at UCLA, that they had an issue like that and they needed in-game nutritional supplementation or any special hydration needs during competition. What are your thoughts on that in general?
Yeah, so cramps, there can be a lot of reasons for cramps. It could be that we're just not, we haven't warmed up enough, we haven't trained that muscle enough. There can be a lot of reasons, but another one could be hydration, and it could be that specifically that sodium thing we talked about. So people think of like, I've always heard like eat a banana when you're cramping, but bananas are high in potassium, and if we go back to the beginning, we talked about sodium. Sodium is actually the electrolyte we lose the most of in our sweat. We lose some potassium, but it's actually not probably potassium losses that's causing our cramping. It's probably more likely a sodium loss. And so something like having salt or sodium, or a drink that has sodium, or people like pickle shots or pickle juice, that can help. Some people will do mustard. There's different ways to get it done, but sodium.
Yeah, do those really help?
Those really help. Yeah, those really help.
Yeah, because I've heard that. I didn't know if that was legitimate or if that was
big time in football too. I mean, because you got big sweaters and outside and big heavy uniforms. Yeah. They love the pickle juice. Any ideas on in-game, nutritional ideas or hacks or anything like that, or no? I mean, you can literally have those things in-game, or you can have the. I always have like an emergency packet of like different electrolyte fluids or electrolyte drops, and that's what I would rush out and give them essentially. So you've got the trainer out there rolling them out and stretching them out, and then putting some kind of sodium into them.
What does a halftime look like at the collegiate and professional level? Are guys eating at halftime?
They should be.
Yes.
It should be.
What's like the halftime look like? Because I know I've had this talk with some high school kids and stuff, and it's like I said, how we met was at the Clippers and one of my clients, and I've seen the setup and that, but it's interesting. I feel like some younger kids, youth, they're like, eat during halftime. Why would I do that? But what does the halftime look like in a college or collegiate or professional setting?
So it depends on your sport and how much time you're actively playing. But if you're active for more than 45 minutes, or it's been more than 45 minutes to an hour since you've last added some carbohydrates in, then it's a great time to get carbohydrates in. I mean, I know a lot of athletes that they're not able to eat anything on the bench. They just don't have an opportunity to. Maybe they're not even hitting the bench, or they're not allowed to, whatever the reason. And so that's where like a Gatorade or a drink that has carbohydrates in it is beneficial, because usually we can at least get some drinks in. But halftime is a perfect opportunity to restore and refuel that carbohydrate. So adding some in, whether that's something simple like chews or a piece of fruit or a PB&J or something like that. PB&Js are like really super popular, but some sort of easily digestible carbohydrate, it's a great opportunity to get it in. I see a lot of people that have been playing their sport for a while. They have their habits locked in, and so getting them to do something that they're not used to doing, they'll just say like, I've never done that, why should I? It'll upset my stomach. I go back to practice with these things, try these things out. Don't try to do it like game day for the first time ever, because you might have some stomach upset, but practice whatever you want to do in game, practice that outside of and training in practice or whatnot. But halftime, especially if you're someone who's active, if you play a sport that's like a stop and go or very, very demanding sport, or you're playing a lot of minutes, like that's a perfect time to put some more fuel in.
Yeah, because man, I think of football, like football guys get there relatively early, and then they have their game, and then the halftime, I was just thinking of different ways in the high school setting, because we're both in the high school setting now, of how to, help refuel at halftime. Because like you said, PB&J is like the cheapest thing you could possibly get, and you can make a few of them and throw them in there, and guys could have them or not have them. But yeah, I was just interested about that.
Even just like fruit snacks. That's like super easy to do, just fruit snacks. Or like there's like waffles, those little those thin little crispy waffles. Those are good.
You mentioned the stunting growth thing, because that could be scary. Like, my child is overweight. I don't want to diet my child because I don't want to stunt their growth. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is really where I would say, like, bring people onto your team, Again, I'm a parent, and I'm someone that I grew up with eating disorders, and I grew up with eating disorders in part because of my parents and things that they said to me when I was young. So it's such a touchy subject, and a lot of times parents don't understand the impact of the words they say and the way that they say it. And so there are certain things, first of all, you can be demonstrating healthy habits yourself. If you're someone that could potentially use a little bit of work in your nutrition, like start to set the habits there. I would be conscious around the way that I talk about weight and whatnot, getting their weight constantly and having, especially if they're getting that also from coach and from their team and from their peers. You just want to make sure that we're not doing something that's going to be detrimental long term. But this is where you can bring someone onto your team that can help kind of guide and be that mediator, and then also so that you don't have to be the bad guy as the parent also, and you don't have to like hurt that relationship with your child. And also, if you don't know how to speak on it, or you're someone who's also dealt with hang-ups with food and body image issues, then you might not be the best one to talk to your kid about it, even though you want to help your kid. So that would be where I would say, like, bring on, if you suspect your child has an eating disorder of any kind, that can go any direction, work with a professional. That's not me, actually. That's a psychologist. And if someone who wants to help your child would make some weight changes, it's obviously being active, but also maybe partnering with a registered dietitian and someone specifically that works with athletes or young athletes, probably.
I just back all that, because I think a lot of times it's in my environment, it's like I tell parents all the time, like, I will never bring it up to an athlete, because a lot of times what I've seen is that their coach has told them they're overweight, a parent is saying it, friends are saying it. Like, they don't need everybody saying it. And so, like, a lot of times I just try to be like that positive person and just, try to talk in a positive way about you're working out, you're doing great things. Mm-hmm. But have, like you said, like having someone on your team that could kind of bridge that and have some more educated conversations and some strategies that don't come across of just, you need to lose weight. And that's a lot of sport coaches say, is like, you're overweight, you need to lose weight. Well, like 10, 12-year-old kid has no idea what that means. Yeah. They probably see on TikTok and Instagram these weight loss diets, and they stop eating, and it could lead to bad things. So I just think, I just back that 100%.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to come and chat. I want to listen to this and go back and take notes and implement this with a lot of the athletes that I train. I think you provided a lot of value, so we've definitely got to do this again. I think I had one question. Is there any resources that you could point anyone to, a parent and athlete, as far as books, websites, anything like that you trust, that gives out good information?
Yeah, Team USA, so like the Olympic team, like they actually have a lot of, it's like Team USA Nutrition, I think, .com or something like that. They put out a lot of great resources, flyers and handouts, sports-specific things. There's also an organization I belong to called the Collegiate and Professional Sports Dietetic Association, sportsrd.org. They have a lot of educational resources and handouts that you can get that talk about different areas of nutrition and recommendations. And then my website, I've also have some resources, some handouts, flyers, and things like that.
What's your website?
JessicaTheSportsRD.com.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll put a link to that on this episode. But thanks again for taking the time to come here in person and chat with us. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yes.
Appreciate it.